I can hear the comments already.
Dude, why would you even buy a TRD Pro if you're just gonna take all the good stuff off of it?
I hear you, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Talon and I make new videos every single week. So if you like what you see here, then consider clicking subscribe. I've got some updates for you guys today on my 2024 4th Gen TRD Pro Tacoma, and this truck is actually a year old as of today. I've been trying to keep you guys in the loop over the past 12 months of owning this truck, giving you some pros and cons, and as much as people don't want to hear it, I haven't found many cons just yet. Everything has been reliable as Toyota typically is. I haven't had any issues that the internet has been slandering these trucks with, talking about like blowing up some upper strut mounts and transmission issues and things like that. The truck has been honestly flawless. I haven't even taken it into Toyota other than for an oil change. I of course have done a few modifications, but for the first year of owning this truck, I wanted to keep it pretty basic, and I decided on the TRD Pro because I wanted everything that Toyota had to offer, including the suspension, all of the infotainment, the sway bar disconnect, the hybrid powertrain. I wanted to experience the best version of a Tacoma that Toyota could offer. Now that takes us right into the question of why am I taking stuff off of this truck if I bought the Pro to have all of that stuff from the factory? Yes, I did actually just change out my suspension at True Automotive, and if you caught some of my recent videos with my Tundra, then you will probably know why. Now I'm gonna leave a link to that video, the most recent update on my Tundra, over here in the corner, so check that out if you want some more like nitty-gritty details. We're gonna get a little bit nerdy about this suspension setup because I wasn't going to change it. The 4th Gen TRD Pro Tacoma came with Fox QS3 suspension, which is adjustable in all 4 corners, and the suspension rocks. Probably the best factory suspension for an off-road vehicle that I've ever owned. That being said, I was kind of stuck with the QS3, and I was like, it just does everything that I want it to do. I don't really think it can get better unless I'm gonna end up spending thousands and thousands of dollars. I've actually seen people do like long travel suspension on the 4th gens already, which is crazy, a little bit too overkill for what I want to do. But then I set up my Tundra with some new suspension from Fox, and it's just so good. It fits everything that I want to do with the truck perfectly, and they happen to make it for this truck right here. So a few days ago, I went into my friends at True Automotive in Denver, Colorado, and my buddy Billy installed some brand new suspension, the Fox Factory Race Series 3.0 with internal bypasses. Now this is where we're going to get a little bit nerdy, so if you don't really care about suspension tech and things like that, you can just fast forward to where we talk about the tires and everything else. But for those of you who are interested in suspension technology, let's get into this. Now the easiest way for you guys to understand this would simply be to just go and watch Fox's video on their internal bypass setup. It has some infographics in there, and it's really informative even if you're not really familiar with how suspension works. I'm going to give you guys some of that information, but then compare it directly next to the Fox QS3 that came off of this truck. So the stock suspension that we took off is the Fox QS3, and they have 3-position adjusters on all 4 corners. That way you can have it on the softest setting if you are going slow off-road, traveling over rocks, maybe some washboard and stuff like that. If you're driving on the road, maybe some back roads, curbs, bumps, stuff that you find driving around a city, then you want to be in the middle mode, mode 2, and that's going to give you a little bit firmer of a ride, so less body roll, and that's basically going to be for like daily driving. And then if you are absolutely hauling ass through the desert, you want to crank that up to 3. You could jump the truck technically. I actually was able to jump a TRD Pro Tacoma, not my own, but I did an event with Toyota, and I sent a truck like this as well as a 4Runner off of a jump with the factory setup, suspension and everything, and the suspension performs amazing. Now, how many people are actually buying these trucks, taking them off-road, jumping them and things like that? I'm gonna say like maybe 1%, maybe less than 1%. I, of course, do take this truck off-road all of the time, so maybe I'm a little bit of an outlier here, but I wanted to test what Toyota had to offer. So with the stock suspension, you could adjust it depending on your driving characteristics, what you were doing that day and things like that. However, with an internal bypass setup, it takes that adjustment and amplifies it by like 10. So if you know the inner workings of shocks, on the Fox Factory Race Series 3.0, you have a 3-inch diameter outer wall and then a smaller wall on the inside where the main piston runs. As the suspension is compressing, of course, the fluid is moving through into the remote reservoirs. There are finned reservoirs on this setup, and of course, they're dynamic speed controls. The DSC clickers on these are actually updated, so they're even a little bit newer than the ones that were found on my Tundra. They actually have numbers and like viewpoints on these, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. So with this setup, you have basically 2 different walls where fluid can actually bypass the main piston because there are ports at the lengthened version of travel and the more compressed version of travel. When you're just going slow, driving on roads and things like that, you don't actually need a ton of compression in there. So for your normal life and daily driving, those bypasses are going to allow the fluid to basically bypass that piston, and it's going to make the ride a lot softer. It's not until you get into some really high speed compressions, I guess low speed compressions too if you're like flexing around off road, but once the piston passes that secondary bypass port where the fluid no longer has a secondary option to go around the outside, that is when a majority of the fluid is going to be moving through the hose into the remote finned reservoir, and that is where your DSC controls really take over. So this is essentially making the ride softer across the board, but you still have the control when you actually need it. So with the factory QS3 on here, you have the soft, the mid, and then the firm settings, but with this one, the internal bypass makes it softer across the board when you're just driving around pretty normally, and then you have a lot more adjustment, both high speed and low speed compression, once you're actually using the truck, off-road scenarios, but even like potholes on the highway. Everything in here is completely adjustable, and the internal bypasses just take things up a notch. You throw the DSC controls on top of that, and that is essentially why this is a huge upgrade for this truck. So now I'll try to bring you guys in here. Maybe we can get a peek of what it looks like while it is installed. One of the upgrades that I did do to this truck is I did already replace the springs in the back. These are from a 3rd gen Tundra, so take the stock ones off of a Tundra. They do fit on a 4th gen Tacoma, and that gives me a little bit more weight capacity in the back, and it makes the truck sit a little bit taller. Another reason I wanted to go with this suspension is because on the front you can adjust the preload, making the truck even a little bit taller, and that helps you fit larger tires. So if we take a look in here at the rear shock, the reservoir is mounted right on top of the frame back here, and you have really easy access to these DSC controls. Like I mentioned, these are numbered now, so you don't have to guess and like count your clicks. There is a viewport right through here for the high-speed compression. So if I want to set that to 1, I just put that over to the 1 position. If I want it set to 4, which is what they recommend from the factory, you can actually see what it's on without counting. Same thing with the low-speed compression. There are actually numbers on the high-speed dial down here, so you just set that based on the arrow. And I have this thing set to the factory settings right now. 7 clicks of adjustment in both the front and the rear, and I mean, look at that. It's just super clean, super simple, and highly effective. So we do have finned reservoirs on here, which obviously makes cooling a lot more efficient. And the main difference between my Tundra setup and this setup is that there's only 1 hose. So there's no recirculating like they have on the Tundra. And to be fair, I think I'm okay with that. I really like the idea of the recirculating reservoirs because it's going to cool way more efficiently than a single hose setup like this. But I'm also kind of rarely like racing through the desert where I would get these things hot enough where I would see some fade. And for my use case, a single hose like this is definitely adequate. If they had the recirculating technology, I would definitely opt for that. But this is already probably more suspension than I actually need. And then coming around to the front, this may be a little bit harder to see, but the reservoir is mounted right on top of the frame there, so you can still gain access to it as opposed to the QS3 clickers, which were like way underneath here, down by like the lower knuckle. So coilover setup, and then coming around to the top, still using my factory TRD Pro upper control arms. Don't love the contrast of the red and orange. I would prefer if these were orange, but I could also powder coat those in the future if I wanted to. No upper control arms like you saw on the Tundra coming from Fox, at least right now. If Fox ever releases a upper control arm version just like the Tundra with the adjustable Heim joints, I would probably opt for those because it will give me more adjustment when it comes to the alignment of this vehicle. But the hoses and everything fit really well right inside. I can actually fit my entire finger here between the upper control arm, and then I can reach the adjustments right over here. so I don't need to get down and crawl around on the ground anymore, and that's a nice touch. Now, this suspension is very new to me on this truck, and it's really only been on the truck for a few days now. I decided to come up a pretty mellow, tame road. I guess you could call it a trail, but there's really nothing too crazy out here. But I've driven this road quite a few times over the past couple of years, and I know every little bump. So I was able to basically compare this suspension to how the QS3 felt. And of course, just like I suspected, since I do have experience with this kit on my Tundra, it feels amazing. The damping controls with the DSC adjusters and everything on here just make it a better ride. And I want to keep saying a lot of good stuff about the QS3 because it is phenomenal suspension with Fox and Toyota teaming up to put that on a factory truck. I think that is really cool. However, this is just simply better. Now, that being said, does everyone need suspension like this? Probably not. If you bought a TRD Pro because you didn't want to change anything out, then you're going to be completely fine with the QS3. But if you're looking for the next best thing, a step well above the QS3, then the Fox Factory Race Series 3.0, you can't go wrong with it. Now, I mentioned that one of the reasons why I wanted to add suspension was to get the truck a little bit taller, and we of course did that. I'm not sure if you guys can tell unless you're comparing it directly next to an older video, but in my last Tacoma adventure that I just posted a few days ago, I was kind of running through ideas in my head of what was next for this truck, and this was definitely the next best thing, and the addition of 37-inch tires. Now, just like having a really nice suspension setup, do you need 37-inch tires on a Tacoma? Absolutely not. Most people do not. However, this is kind of like my dedicated off-road solo adventure rig, so the 35s treated me fine, but I figured with the 4th gen, I've seen people run 37s, and I was curious as to how much work that would actually be. And after we installed the suspension at True Automotive, these guys figured it out, and they did a really good job very quickly too. Now, I am no stranger to putting larger tires on vehicles that generally come with much smaller tires. I believe this came with like a 33 from the factory. I've been running 35s for the past year now, and it was just time to see if 37s would fit. A lot of you guys probably know my friend Mike, and he's been running 37s for a little while now, so I picked his brain a little bit, and after we got the suspension installed, we just jumped right into this. So a lot of people ask me about my wheel and tire setup. These are the Black Rhino Baharis. I've been running these for about a year now. They are a positive 25 offset, so I'm not crazy poking out the side. I do have the larger Pro fenders on here, and it keeps the wrap and everything on the side of the truck a little bit fresher as opposed to something like a 0 offset or something negative where my wheel and tire would be poking way out. I'd be flicking mud and rocks all over the side of the truck. I already do that with my Tundra, and to be honest, I don't really prefer it. Another thing to keep in mind with trying to fit 37s on a truck like this is that if you run a more aggressive offset like a 0 or something negative, you're going to have a lot more to trim on the inside here. The average person on the street probably wouldn't really know that I'm running such a large tire size, but it makes a huge difference off-road. I don't think I even really need to explain why running a larger tire is better when you are cruising around off-road. So we're just gonna kind of skip over that part for now. So I'm running the same tire that I was running as a 35 on here, but now in a 37, the Firestone Destination MT2. I put about 10,000 miles on that previous set on the 35s, and there is still a ton of life left in those tires. The longest I've been running Firestone now is probably like 2.5 years with the Firestone Destination XTs, which I have on my Sprinter van. Took those all the way up to Alaska and back, all around the western side of the United States, and they've been holding up good. A tire like this, I would assume would have a little bit less of a life if you're driving on the road quite a lot. But to be honest, I'm really only driving my Tundra and my Tacoma when I'm going out on an adventure. So a lot of the time I'm on pavement for a little while until I get to dirt, spend most of my time off-road, and then of course hop back on the road to get back home. So I'm a huge fan of the Destination MTs. They're actually kind of like pre-drilled for spikes if you want to run this as like a snow tire setup. Huge chunky blocks on here. I think the tire looks really good, and also it clears out snow and debris very, very well. I really haven't had any issue with traction with these tires yet, although for For the most part, I'm on rock and sand. I try to stay out of the mud whenever possible, but if you caught my series last year when we were in Eastern Oregon, I had my Tundra on MT2s in some of the slickest conditions that I've ever been in, and they did great. So this has been my go-to tire now for a little over a year, and I think these are going to last me quite a long time. So now, fitting a tire this size, what do you actually have to do to make this fit? Again, if you're not running a crazy aggressive offset, then there's honestly not a lot of work to do. I like making the comparison of running a 35-inch tire on a 3rd gen Tacoma and then a 37-inch tire on a 4th gen Tacoma. I've made quite a few videos about how to get a 35-inch tire to fit on a 3rd gen Tacoma. There's a lot of different products like the C4 oversized tire fitment kit, where you basically completely replace everything in here. You hammer back pinch welds, body mount chops, body mount relocations. There's a ton of stuff that you have to do to get that to work properly without rubbing the inside of your truck all of the time. A 35 fit on this truck with little to no effort. There is a little frame horn in the back here that you just simply remove, no trimming at all, and that tire was good for the entire year that I was running it. Now, moving up 2 more inches, this tire is significantly larger than the 35, obviously, so I knew we would have to do a little bit more work on the inside. So let me bring you in a little bit closer so you can kind of see what we have going on here. So let's start with the back of the wheel well. Over here, you'll notice 1, 2, 3 open holes there. That is where I removed that frame horn about a year ago, pretty much right when I got the truck. And I could take this a step further and actually grind off this bracket here, because I'm not going to be using that anymore. The body mount is right behind here. But with my offset, I don't even come close to hitting that. Maybe if I flex out really hard, I will decide to remove that in the future. But for now, that's going to stay, and just 3 bolts, simply unbolt it. And then if you have a truck that is equipped with the sway bar stabilizing disconnect mechanism, it's actually mounted typically right here on the frame. I don't know why Toyota mounted it inside of the wheel well. Obviously, they made this truck with the idea of people running larger tire sizes on here. So a 37 definitely hits that. 35 does not. So all I did was remove a few bolts, disconnected the wires. It previously came around this side of the body mount. I simply just ran it up over the frame and reconnected it behind the body mount right here. So that cleared out everything from the frame side here with the frame horn and then the sway bar disconnect mechanism. And then we did do a slight little chop right up to the corner of the TRD Pro fender flares on here. Still looks pretty factory. If I didn't point it out and tell you, you probably wouldn't even be able to tell that we cut anything there. And then moving on to the front of the truck, the TRD Pro comes with a little bit of a different front bumper than some of the lower trim models. So it's kind of like a Viper cut already. You have more tire exposed, a little bit better ground clearance because of that. And the fender flare starts much higher, so I did not have to cut through that. All we did was simply make this cut a little bit more aggressive. Billy did a really good job with this and simply brought the line straight up here to about where the fender flare starts. And again, looks pretty factory. You probably wouldn't even be able to tell that it's cut unless I pointed it out to you. And then when it comes to kind of like the minute details, we did trim a lot of the felt inner fender liner here. So we trimmed that straight across to a bolt, so it's still very solid in here. Same thing in the rear back here. We just cut that kind of straight across. That way we were not grabbing felt when driving this in reverse at full lock. And as of right now, I am not rubbing anywhere in the front. Now, of course, that may change in the future once I start getting into some more technical trails and stuff like that. So you guys will have to check back. This setup is new, but the front fits really good with 37s. We matched everything over here on this side and no complaints at all. And then coming back to the rear, this is where fitment is very tight, but of course, with the axle in the rear, the tire is not going to be turning and it's not really going to be shifting all that much. So we did a tiny little modification in here. And unless you're comparing this next to a stock truck, you probably can't even tell, but there are basically some like little reliefs right here for some bolts in the front and the rear. Right here, you will notice those little like plastic protrusions there. It's really close in the rear, but it doesn't actually hit those. The front, under heavy acceleration, the truck squats down and this would come back and just bump the tire a little bit. So we shaved those off with a little razor blade, and that is essentially all that we've done in the rear. Now, some added benefits of the TRD Pro Tacoma. Inside of the coil spring there, you will notice that I still have the factory Fox hydro bumps in there, which are game changing when you are slamming over stuff really hard. Now on top of the hydro bumps, we also have another bump stop. Right there is the hydro bump, and then right there is just kind of a standard bump stop. And one thing that I will probably be doing here pretty soon is actually getting something a little bit better for off-road. I did install some Timberin active off-road bump stops for my Tundra, and I think I'm going to do that here because this is a lot of tire in this wheel well back here. And there's no signs of it right now, but I believe when this thing is stuffed, it's going to bump into the fender flare right here. When I'm going fast and hitting bumps relatively quickly, you will notice right here where the plastic is smooth there's a tiny bit of rub there, like less than the size of my thumb, so I could trim that plastic a little bit. And then again, over on this side, I don't really notice any signs of rubbing here, but I can almost guarantee that this will when I'm like completely flexed out. Same thing, a tiny little bit of rubbing right here, like less than my pointer finger, so I could simply trim that off, and I barely even hear that when I'm driving around off-road, so not a huge issue. 37s in the rear fit pretty dang easily. So with all that being said, it is much easier to fit a 37-inch tire on a 4th gen Tacoma than it is to fit a 35-inch tire on the 3rd gen Tacoma. No body mount chop, relocate, hammering back pinch welds or anything like that. Just a little bit of trimming, the proper tire and offset fitment for the truck, and it's almost like Toyota intended for us to do things like this. They've been listening to us after years of people struggling to fit even a 35-inch tire on the 3rd gen. We can now fit a 37 pretty dang easily. Now you couple that larger tire with even better suspension from Fox, and this thing rides so nice now. The larger tire just rolls over everything. I haven't even aired these down yet, but I can only imagine airing down and then adjusting my DSC controls down to like the lowest setting. This thing is just going to kind of float over everything. I'm going to be able to rip through desert, crawl through rocks, and do everything that I love doing with a truck like this much more comfortably than ever before. So I think that's all that I have for now. I definitely still need to test out this setup a little bit more, maybe tweak a little bit of trimming here and there, but I think for my first trip out, right out of the gate after a fresh install, this thing turned out pretty perfectly. If you guys have any questions on the Fox Factory Race Series 3.0 or trimming to fit 37s on a 4th gen Tacoma, let me know in the comments down below and I'll try to answer anything as best as possible. Stay tuned for some more trips with this truck and the brand new setup. I don't want to jinx myself, but this may be the end-all be-all setup for this truck for my personal use. So let me know what you guys think, and if you are new to the channel, again, consider clicking subscribe because I make new videos every single week. As always, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you in the next one.